Okay, here we go, section 6.2. We're just looking at solving quadratic equations again, okay? So we're talking about quadratic equations being this, right? ax squared plus bx plus c. We looked at it being y before. That's a quadratic function. So when it's equal to 0, we got a quadratic equation, right? And so when y is 0, what we're looking for are the x-intercepts, right? So when we find the x-intercepts, we can do it a bunch of different ways. We looked at it last chapter already, did some algebra. We also found out a couple other ways. If you remember, one of the first ways we found it was by graphing. Okay, so you actually graph the function. Again, from this, ax squared plus bx plus c. From this, you can get the y-intercept, that's c. If you change it to vertex form or to standard form, right, you've got this here. And now you can find the vertex. The vertex is hk. You can find the x-intercepts in a variety of ways. You can get the shape here, you graph it, you find out where it crosses the x-axis, and those are your solutions. Not the best way to do things, but it's doable, right? The next one we looked at is factoring. And when we factor, what we did, well, that's last chapter, okay? So just factoring your trinomials, if you can anyways. Third way is just using algebra. And remember that if we have this formula here, right, sometimes we don't have the whole thing. So we're going to look at a couple different situations. What about if your C value, this value here, is 0? Okay, so that means that you have a plus 0 here. You don't have it. There's nothing there. In this case, it's one of the easiest ones to do because every single time what you can do is you can factor out, let's do it on this side here, you can factor out the x, and that leaves you with 3x plus 5. Now don't forget that whole zero product law, right? If a times b is 0, that means a is equal to 0, and b is equal to 0. So this is two things being multiplied together. So x is equal to 0, and 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. And then we just solve this here, and you get negative 5/3. Those would be your solutions, okay? Every single time you get these questions, when you don't have that last constant, you can always take an x out, and it makes the question significantly easier. Now we're going to look at if the b is 0. Okay, so if your b is 0, we're going to end up with the situation like this. We don't have that middle term. So this is called the square root property, which means you can either bring this over here or bring that over there. Let's make this positive, bring it over to this side. 2x squared equals 10. Divide everything by 2, you get 10 halves, which is 5. So you have x squared equals 5, the square root, x is equal to plus or minus root 5. Okay, the x-intercepts. This looks, we can do similar questions like this, but if I said x minus 3, all squared is equal to 7. Okay, so in this case, we've got a squared here and nothing else, so we can square root this side, square root this side. X minus 3 is equal to plus or minus root 7. X would equal plus or minus root 7 plus 3. So essentially you got two answers, right? Let's turn it around. Let's put the 3 first. 3 plus root 7, and then 3 minus root 7. And you'd have two answers there. So that is the square root principle, essentially. And there's a couple other things that we're going to look at. We looked at completing the square, too. Okay. In the last chapter, you solved ones like this. And the process was exactly the same. What we wanted to find the vertex, right? Then you found the vertex. You wanted to find the when it hit the ground or something like that. And that was the x-intercepts. So what you need to do is remember how to complete the square. If you take a negative 2 out, it's going to be x squared plus 5x, right? Then x squared, plus a number, minus a number, and we took that plus 3 out. So half of 5 is 5 halves, and 5 halves squared is 25 over 4. 25 over 4. So now, minus 2x plus 5 halves all squared. This becomes that binomial, right? And then this leaves. So that's going to be plus 50 over 4 plus 3. So let's finish this off too. Negative 2 bracket x plus 5 halves all squared. 3 over 1, so that's the same as saying 12 over 4. So we have 62 over 4. Now, we can solve it by bringing this over. Negative 62 over 4 equals negative 2x plus 5/2 all squared, right? And then we can divide by negative 2, so I get minus over minus will be 62 over 8 will be a positive, right? Equals x plus 5 over 2 all squared. Now, square root, right? So that's plus or minus the square root of 62 over 8 is equal to x plus 5/2. And then we have plus or minus the square root of 62 over 8 minus 5/2 will equal your x. Another type of question that you're going to get, you don't necessarily have to do this, okay, because we're going to have other ways to solve them. So these are other ways to solve your quadratics depending on what they look like. Look at them first. There's lots of different ways to do it. Don't always expect a factor, okay? Take the path of least resistance. The next section will show you how to graph or how to solve them, any of them, using what we call the quadratic formula.